I am really grateful for the opportunity to be able to share with you a very special episode today. And we're going to be having a difficult conversation, but yet at the same time, providing some really great resources. I do want to give everybody just a heads up. We are going to be talking on a high level about domestic violence and the impact that it can have, particularly around wireless cell phones. And so feel free to stop, pause, revisit if you feel that anything that we're talking about here is triggering to you. The intention is to provide you with some really amazing resources and information about something really exciting that has happened in the cell phone industry. So I am excited to introduce you to my guest today, Heather Kutz. She has been in the wireless industry since 2006, so almost 20 years, working across multiple carriers and roles from frontline operations to strategic leadership. And over the years, she's developed a deep understanding of how mobile technology works behind the scenes and how it can be used either to empower or control. And while she's not here representing a specific company, she's here to share how the entire industry works and how they're stepping up to help support survivors. So, Heather, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Rhonda. I'm honored to be here, be able to share just from my experience working in the wireless industry, what I've observed, and then projects and initiatives that I have seen the carriers roll out in partnership with the FCC, and how both the FCC and carriers are recognizing just the tools that our cell phones have become. They've really become a necessity in our lives, and they're meant to be for connection and not control. However, sometimes we have seen that in abusive relationships, they can be weaponized. So today, I really want to share with survivors how you can reclaim your tech and your autonomy, and also just maybe some warning signs for people too before getting to that place of needing to reclaim.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's break this down a little bit. So when we think about, cell phones, and I've said this on previous episodes, and I shared this within my bridge community as far as people that are kind of going through this process, I've said, the challenging part, right, is I think back to the 90s when people were maybe calling their spouse or their partner and they would always have to go through the front desk. And finally, the receptionist is like, can you tell him to stop calling? Can you tell her to stop calling? Like, enough's enough, right? And then we introduce cell phones to the mix, and it's a lot more private. They're not going through the front desk. It's not impacting directly other people where they're seeing the impact on their workplace productivity or their day because they've got, the cell phone to be able to contact people directly, whether it's through phone calls, text messages, or emails. So, kind of along those lines, let's start with some red flags. Okay. Let's start with some things that if people may be noticing as it relates to how cell phones can be weaponized. And of course, then I also want to talk about the Safe Connections Act, but let's start with some red flags.
Yeah, so I think it's important to distinguish that with cell phones, whether you're on a shared plan or not, there's awareness that needs to be had. So if we start from the position of you just have your own device, you're not on a shared plan with someone, what are some things that can still happen? I would say the biggest piece is surveillance and privacy violation. So we know things like keeping passcodes on your phone. One of the things that I have witnessed is kind of an imbalance of one partner may share their passcode and give access, and the other partner may not. That's a very different imbalance in the trust in that relationship. So if a partner is expecting to have full access to you, but you are not getting that in return, that might be a reason to pause and reflect. And I think every relationship needs to consider whether you need to have full access to the device. There's a lot that comes into trust, and this is much bigger than I am, and definitely something to explore with experts and professionals. But I think the biggest thing is imbalance. Also, understanding the different ways that you can lock your device, the facial recognition, the fingerprints, the passcodes, all of that. But be mindful if you're in a situation where you are concerned that someone could be trying to access your device for more information. And this can happen, I think, all stages, whether we're getting to that point where I know we're talking about Safe Connections Act today, and we're at that point that someone may be making an escape plan. Obviously, there could be information that you're wanting to keep safe there. But this can even be earlier on in a relationship. If there's signs of kind of controlling behavior, there can be desire And if I can just jump in really quick with some context, with Safe Connections Act, the language used in there is abuser and survivor. So I think just for the continuity of today, I'll use those same words, abuser and survivor, just to keep the consistency throughout, if you're okay with that.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. So we've got some red flags, right? We've got the surveillance component, the access to be able to get information, shared passwords, the facial recognition, really being able to make sure that there's some privacy around those. And what else? What are some other red flags for those people that maybe don't have a shared plan, but still want to be aware of some red flags?
Yeah. And so I think it's understanding what kind of information can be accessed and how. So we see like cloud and shared accounts that way. So, for example, if you have an Apple account, iCloud account, and that can be signed in on multiple accounts. So you might on your device have your information and think you have your device locked down. But if that iCloud account is accessed on another device, you can see things like your text message, your location, your phone calls, apps downloaded, all of that. And so you can see how that could get really concerning. There's also software that and applications that can access all of the existing information on your device as well as get real time updates. So I hate to put additional work on survivors, but there are things that you can do to see if maybe there's tracking type applications on your device and things that you can do to try to prevent it. So if you notice simple things like your device is randomly restarting, the battery is draining really quickly and overheating. We kind of talk about this like spyware that we see on devices. These applications that are trying to get your information work the same way, whether it's someone external or maybe someone you're in a relationship who wants to get that information as well. You might notice that a device really starts to lag. You might see some go through all your app lists, especially now there's ways to on your devices. You don't necessarily see all of the applications you have downloaded on your front screen. You have to go to the list and really see everything that's on. If it's unfamiliar, maybe, you want to look into what is that application. Another really kind of common thing that can happen is your phone will light up when it's not in use. So that could be a sign that there's something working in the background.
Can you give us an example of what that software could be? Names?
I would be happy to provide some resources that could give some examples. A
Yeah.
lot of times they are disguised, almost looking like a kind of normal app, if you would, but they aren't. Again, I will provide these links. There is software that I could plug in your device and take all the information off of it. So your text message conversations, all of that. And again, I say you can really see how that could be weaponized. Even honest conversations that you're having, even early in a relationship, maybe you're sharing with a mom or a friend, like, oh, I really like this person when they do X, but I don't know, I'm kind of on the fence because they really upset me or disappointed me when they did something else. Well, now they have a playbook to be able to really use all that information. Again, I don't want to come with all this negativity of cell phones can give so much access, but I think it's really important to understand just how much access someone can have. So if you're someone who keeps all their photos and all their text message chats and all their emails throughout all the years, that's a lot of information that someone could obtain.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And, kind of along those lines, right? I mean, so what about for the people who have a shared plan?
Yeah. Well, it kind of goes a step further there, right? Because then you may not need this additional software or applications to be able to get access to things like call history and to text message history and all of that. You can get that through the carriers. So, understanding that if in this case, abuser is account holder, they would have access to all that call information. Now, in the case if the survivor is the account holder, but the abuser has access to the account and is treated as an authorized user, they could also obtain that information again. So being mindful of that. But I think it goes further than just the privacy and surveillance component. Now there's also a financial dependency in all of this because if, again, I explain it from both sides. If the abuser is the account holder, then they quote unquote own your phone number, own your device, because now we lease devices too, right? So you don't own it. It takes a while to pay off a device. And so if you're in a situation where you may want to leave a relationship, but they own your phone number, quote unquote, own your device, quote unquote, and you may feel stuck. Also, in return, if you are the survivor as the account holder, but they don't want to pay their bill anymore, they want to leave you with the phone, Now you may need to be financially responsible for that as well, too. So there's a lot that can happen there. And then there's also another piece that I don't think we talk about as much but the ability to manipulate service. So if the abuser is the account holder and they want to suspend service to a survivor's phone at any given time, you can do that. And especially now, we have a lot of self-service options at our fingertips as users of devices. So we can go into an app through the carrier, be able to suspend and unsuspend phones for good reasons, right? We should be able to do that if we have any concerns, or maybe we have a child who wants to use it during school during the day. We need to have it for those kind of reasons, but it can again be weaponized. So as we continue to empower and provide options and autonomy, there's also this reverse of people being able to weaponize it.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the things that you mentioned is around the financial aspect. And I think there have been plenty of times where I've had clients who feel like their phone number is being held hostage. And it's one of the things that ends up part of the final agreement. Like, listen, you got to release the number.
Yeah.
And so again, these are all really important conversations because I know that there are a lot of women that are listening that are like, Rhonda, thank you so much for having this conversation with Heather because these are some of the concerns I'm having. They feel like they're either being followed or tracked, or there's conversations that their abuser knows that they're like, how do they know that? The only way that they would know is if they had access somehow, some way to my phone. And so, or conversations or whatever. So, kind of along these lines, let's dive into the Safe Connections Act. And first, I want to start by you sharing with us what the act is, how it came to be, and then ultimately how people may be able to take advantage of it if they need help.
Absolutely. Great segue. Yes. In an ideal scenario, people would be able to discuss wanting to take their phone number, be able to port that to another carrier, but there are situations where that's not an option. And this could really come into play again, as we talked about before, where someone may be making that escape plan. And so, Safe Connections Act was a law that was designed to protect survivors of domestic violence, dating violence, stalking, and any other related abuse by removing barriers so that a survivor can safely maintain access and have privacy to their mobile communication. So initially, this act was passed in December of 2022. And by July of 2024, carriers had implemented a line separation process for survivors that would provide anonymity and safety to those survivors in that process. All the major carriers support Safe Connections Act, have a process in place to help a survivor either A, get off of an abuser's account, or B, if the survivor is account holder, be able to remove an abuser off their account. They are done privately with a very specialized team that is trained, knows the right conversation, documentation required. I would also put that the mandate requires that upon intake of one of these requests through the Safe Connections Act, it needs to be completed within 72 hours. So there's also a really short turnaround window that carriers are expected to provide survivors with in helping them through this transition. So what I will do is I will share the links to each carrier's Safe Connections page. Each one has within their website, they have a separate standalone page and process. Now, the process is not the same for all the carriers. In some cases, a survivor will need to contact a phone number. In some cases, there is an electronic form to submit, but they all have the same requirements that they can help a survivor remove either a line for the abuser quietly, discreetly. Their service is not interrupted so that they don't know that this process is happening in the background. Also, they're in the reverse. If a survivor is getting off the abuser's account, it will happen discreetly, quietly. And there could be different variations. There could be a situation where there is a lease on a phone and they need to identify, can the survivor pay off this amount? I would just say go and don't think just because you have a phone to pay off or anything like that, that you should not make the call. The carriers are finding ways to support survivors. I cannot speak to the exact scenarios and exceptions and all of that, but call or fill out the form, whatever your carrier requires. They are there. They are specialized teams to help you. They're subject matter experts in this area. And again, the whole expectation here is to protect survivors and keep it anonymous, and swift. And the other part that I would say as part of this, if you're familiar with the Lifeline program, which does discount cell phone plans, as a survivor who goes through the Safe Connections Act needing to remove a line from an account, they can also qualify for 6 months of Lifeline benefits too. So I think
Mm,
that's a really great added piece that the FCC implemented and important to know. And then the last thing that I would just highlight here is there are some really promising future enhancements to come with this mandate. So, one of the things that we talked about is making phone calls. And if someone has access to your call logs, how that can be kind of a dangerous situation. So, as part of the Safe Connections Act FCC mandate, there will be future implementation that if a hotline, like domestic violence hotline, or maybe some of the more like local shelters, things like that, are
yeah.
contacted, those numbers will be suppressed from call records through the carriers. Amazing. Carriers have been working on the solutions to be able to create this automated process to suppress these numbers. However, I will say the deadline for this has been delayed. My understanding with this is that there has not been a way, the FCC has not delivered the list of hotline numbers. There's been some delays in how to keep that list updated, accurate, a lot of technicalities, all of that. But I would just say, know that the pathways have been created, conversations keep being had, improvements are being made. And I think that'll be a huge win once we can get that piece of it deployed as well, too. So there's not that fear to make that phone call should someone need to.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I'm just so grateful for the Safe Connections Act. I think this is fantastic. And I love how you said, Heather, like the pathways have been made forward. The heavy lift on the front end is just getting the approval, and then it's a matter of implementing all of the things. But there's been significant progress. And I just think this is just so amazing. As we kind of wrap up our time, I know we're going to be putting some resources in the show notes that people can take a look at. Any kind of final thoughts or encouragement that you'd like to leave our listeners with today?
Yeah, thank you for that. I would just say you deserve privacy, safety, and control over your own communication and your tech devices. I think the Safe Connections Act has been a huge step towards that. But also, as individuals, it's knowing what your tech can do and your rights that you have with all of your communication and technology devices.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I am a champion. Oh my gosh, I love this so much. I think it's so important. I know there's a lot of women listening that are really feeling empowered after our conversation today, Heather, because they now have some guidance and direction on how they may be able to start crafting an exit plan if they are concerned about their safety. And of course, their cell phones have been part of the weaponization to keep them stuck. So thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise with the listeners today. I just really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to share.